The transport shuttle's engines hummed quietly as it approached the prestigious Galactic Academy station orbiting Centauri Prime. Through the reinforced viewport, 17-year-old Maya Chen watched the massive structure grow larger, its gleaming metallic surfaces reflecting the light of 3 distant suns. The Academy was a marvel of engineering, home to the brightest young minds from across the galaxy's civilized species. Maya pressed her palm against the cool glass, her reflection staring back with dark eyes that held secrets no teenager should carry. Her black hair was pulled back in a simple ponytail, and she wore the standard civilian transport clothes that marked her as unremarkable. Just another human student joining the Academy's ranks. The other passengers on the shuttle gave her curious glances. A tall Altarian with blue-tinted skin and elegant features whispered to his companion about the primitive human joining their year. 2 Zephyrian twins, their crystalline bodies catching the light, chittered in their musical language while pointing in her direction. Even the shuttle's pilot, a professional Corvan with 4 arms and gray skin, had raised an eyebrow when she'd boarded alone. Humans were relatively new to the Galactic Federation. Earth had only made first contact 15 years ago, and most species still considered them a backwater civilization that had barely mastered faster-than-light travel. The fact that a human had qualified for the Academy was seen as either a clerical error or some kind of diversity initiative. Maya didn't mind their stares. She'd grown used to being underestimated. The shuttle docked with a soft thunk, and the passengers began gathering their belongings. Maya shouldered her single bag and followed the crowd through the airlock. The Academy's main reception hall was breathtaking, with soaring ceilings that seemed to stretch into infinity and holographic displays showing the greatest achievements of galactic civilization. Students from dozens of species milled about, their conversations creating a symphony of different languages and vocal patterns. Maya noticed how they naturally segregated into groups based on their homeworlds and species. The proud Altarians stood together like living statues, the Zephyrians formed a glittering cluster near the information displays, and the massive Thurians occupied an entire section with their bear-like bulk. A holographic attendant materialized in front of Maya, its blue light shimmering. "Welcome to Galactic Academy, Maya Chen of Earth. Please proceed to Registration Station 7 for species-appropriate accommodations and class assignments." She made her way through the crowd, trying to ignore the whispers that followed her. At the registration station, a bored-looking Corvan clerk scanned Maya's identification chip and frowned at his display. There seems to be an error in your file," the clerk said, his 4 hands dancing over the controls. "It lists your previous education as classified military training rather than a civilian institution." Maya's expression didn't change. "That's correct." The clerk's large black eyes blinked slowly. "Military training? But Earth barely has a proper space force. What kind of military training could a human possibly have received that would qualify for Academy admission?" Before Maya could answer, a commotion erupted near the main entrance. A group of senior students had surrounded a smaller figure, their voices raised in what sounded like mockery. Maya turned to see a young Pixian being pushed around by 3 much larger Altarians. Pixians were among the smallest sapient species in the galaxy, standing barely 4 feet tall with delicate features and large, expressive eyes. This particular Pixian looked to be a first-year student, clutching a data pad to his chest, while the Altarians towered over him. "Look what we have here," one of the Altarians said, his voice carrying the musical accent of his people but twisted with cruelty. A little Pixian trying to play with the big kids. "Don't you know this academy is for real warriors and scholars, not glorified pets?" The Pixian's voice was barely audible. "Please, I just want to get to my dormitory assignment." The lead Altarian, who wore the silver insignia of a third-year student, snatched the data pad from the Pixian's hands. Let's see what classes the little mouse is taking. Combat tactics? Strategic analysis? He laughed, a sound like breaking glass. This is rich. They're letting prey species into military courses now. Maya watched the scene unfold, her hands slowly clenching into fists. The Corvin clerk was still trying to sort out her registration, but Maya's attention was entirely focused on the bullying happening 20 feet away. Other students had gathered to watch, some looking uncomfortable but none willing to intervene. The Altarians were from one of the most powerful and respected species in the galaxy, known for their martial prowess and strategic brilliance. Few would dare challenge them directly. The Pixian reached for his datapad, but the Altarian held it high above his head. "Jump for it, little mouse. Maybe if you entertain us enough, we'll let you have it back." Maya's vision narrowed to a tunnel focused on the scene before her. Memories flashed through her mind unbidden. Other times, other places where the strong had preyed upon the weak. The smell of burning buildings, the screams of civilians, the weight of weapons in her hands when she was far too young to carry them. She had sworn she was done with that life. The war was over, humanity was at peace, and she was supposed to be just another student now. But watching the Pixian's humiliation, Maya felt something cold and familiar settling over her like an old coat. The registration clerk was still talking, something about dormitory assignments and class schedules, but his voice seemed to come from very far away. Maya stepped away from the registration desk and began walking toward the group of Altarians. The crowd parted before her without quite knowing why. There was something in her movement, a predatory grace that spoke to the primitive survival instincts buried deep in every sapient brain. Conversations died as she passed, leaving an expanding bubble of silence in her wake. The lead Altarian was still holding the datapad above the Pixian's head when Maya stopped directly behind him. "Excuse me," she said quietly. The Altarian turned, his expression shifting from amusement to irritation as he looked down at the human girl. "What do you want, Primitive? Can't you see we're busy here?" Maya's voice remained perfectly calm. "I want you to give him back his datapad and apologize." The Altarian's companions burst into laughter. Their leader's blue-tinged face twisted into a sneer. "You want me to what? Do you have any idea who you're talking to, human? I am Valdris Moonwhisper, heir to the Altarian Fourth Fleet. My family has been defending this galaxy since before your species learned to make fire." Maya nodded slowly. "I see. And you think that gives you the right to terrorize smaller students?" Valdris's eyes glittered with malice. "I think it means I don't have to take orders from some backward monkey who probably learned to use tools last week." He gestured dismissively at Maya. "Run along, little human. Find some other primitives to play with." The Pixian looked up at Maya with desperate hope in his large eyes, but also fear. He didn't want her to get hurt trying to help him. Maya studied Valdris for a long moment, taking in his confident stance, the way his companions flanked him, the cruel smile on his aristocratic features. She had seen that look before, on the faces of warlords and tyrants who thought power meant the right to hurt others. "One more chance," Maya said softly. "Give him the datapad." Valdris laughed again, but this time it had a sharp edge. Other students were gathering now, drawn by the confrontation. Word was spreading quickly through the reception hall that a human was challenging an Altarian noble. "Or what?" Valdris asked. "What exactly do you think you can do about it, Primitive?" Maya's expression didn't change, but something shifted in her posture. It was subtle, almost imperceptible, but suddenly she didn't look like a teenage girl anymore. She looked like something much more dangerous. "I'll show you what 3 years in the Terran colonial wars taught me," Maya said quietly. The reception hall had gone completely silent now. Even the holographic displays seemed to dim as every eye focused on the confrontation. The mention of the colonial wars sent ripples of confusion through the crowd. Most galactic citizens knew very little about humanity's recent conflicts, dismissing them as primitive skirmishes between backwards colonies. Valdris's smile faltered slightly. There was something in the human girl's eyes that made his survival instincts whisper warnings. But he was surrounded by his friends, watched by hundreds of students, and his pride wouldn't let him back down from a challenge issued by a member of a species barely out of the Stone Age. "The colonial wars?" he said mockingly. "What could humans possibly have learned fighting with sticks and stones? Your entire species is barely capable of—" He never finished the sentence. Maya moved faster than anyone in the reception hall had ever seen a living being move. One moment she was standing 3 feet away from Valdris, the next her hand was wrapped around his wrist in a grip that made him cry out in pain. The datapad fell from his nerveless fingers, but Maya caught it with her free hand before it could hit the floor. Valdris tried to pull away, but Maya's grip was like a steel trap. His face went from blue to purple as he struggled against her hold. "The Terran colonial wars," Maya said conversationally, as if she wasn't currently restraining a being twice her size with apparent ease, "were fought against the Kithara hive mind. Perhaps you've heard of them? Silicon-based life forms with exoskeletons harder than military-grade armor and reflexes that make your species look like statues." She twisted Valdris's wrist just slightly, and he dropped to one knee with a gasp of pain. His companions reached for weapons that weren't there, their hands finding only the civilian clothes they wore as students. "The war lasted 3 years," Maya continued, her voice never rising above a conversational tone. 67 human colonies were attacked. 43 were completely destroyed before we learned how to fight back. I was 14 when they hit my home on New Sparta. The Pixian had backed away, clutching his retrieved datapad to his chest and staring at Maya with a mixture of awe and terror. "The Kithara don't take prisoners," Maya said. "They don't negotiate. They don't show mercy. They turn entire populations into biomass for their hive ships. So we had to learn to be harder than they were. Faster. More ruthless." She released Valdris's wrist and stepped back. The Altarian noble stumbled to his feet, cradling his injured arm and staring at Maya as if seeing her for the first time. 67 colonies defended by 3 million human soldiers," Maya said. "Do you know how many of us survived the war, Valdris Moonwhisper?" The reception hall was so quiet that the hum of the life support systems seemed deafening. "About 50,000, Maya answered her own question. "The rest died buying time for evacuations, holding choke points that couldn't be held, and learning to kill things that your nightmares couldn't imagine." She handed the datapad to the trembling Pixian, who accepted it with shaking hands. "So, when I ask you politely to stop bullying a smaller student," Maya said, turning back to Valdris, "I'm not making a request. I'm giving you an opportunity to avoid finding out what I learned in those 3 years." Valdris backed away, his aristocratic composure completely shattered. His companions moved with him, their earlier confidence replaced by genuine fear. Maya looked around the silent reception hall, meeting the eyes of students who moments before had dismissed her as a primitive. Now they stared back with expressions ranging from shock to terror to something that might have been respect. "I'm here to learn," she said, her voice carrying clearly through the vast space. "I want to study galactic history, xenobiology, and peace negotiations. I want to be part of the solution that makes sure wars like the one I grew up in never happen again." She paused, letting her gaze sweep across the crowd. "But if anyone thinks my desire for peace makes me weak, or that being human makes me less than you—" She smiled, and it was not a pleasant expression. "Well, you're welcome to test that theory. Just remember that I spent 3 years fighting monsters that could tear apart heavy armor with their bare claws. Most of you aren't nearly as scary as a Kithara drone." The silence stretched for another long moment. Then, slowly, conversations began to resume as students turned back to their registration and dormitory assignments. but the whispers now carried a very different tone, and the glances sent in Maya's direction held a new kind of respect. Valdris and his companions melted into the crowd, the Altarian noble still cradling his wrist and shooting fearful looks back at Maya. The young Pixian approached her hesitantly. "Thank you," he said in a voice barely above a whisper. "I'm Kip Brightwhisker. I don't know how to repay you." Maya's expression softened, the dangerous predator disappearing and leaving only a teenager again. "You don't owe me anything, Kip. We're all students here. We should be looking out for each other." Kip's large eyes filled with tears of gratitude. "If there's ever anything I can do for you, anything at all." "Just focus on your studies," Maya said gently. "And maybe next time someone smaller needs help, you'll remember this moment." As Kip nodded eagerly and hurried off to complete his registration, Maya turned back to her own paperwork. The Corvin clerk was staring at her with new understanding in his black eyes. "I think I understand your file now," he said quietly. "Military classification makes sense for a colonial war veteran." He handed her a data chip containing her room assignment and class schedule. "Welcome to Galactic Academy, Maya Chen. I have a feeling your time here will be very interesting." Maya pocketed the chip and shouldered her bag. As she made her way toward the dormitory levels, she could feel hundreds of eyes following her progress. Word of the confrontation would spread quickly through the Academy's social networks. She had hoped to blend in, to be just another student pursuing an education. But perhaps that had been naive. Her past wasn't something she could simply leave behind, and maybe that wasn't entirely a bad thing. After all, the galaxy was full of bullies and predators who preyed on the weak. If her reputation could protect even a few students like Kip, then maybe her violent past could serve a peaceful purpose. As the transport doors closed behind her and she headed deeper into the academy, Maya allowed herself a small smile. Classes hadn't even started yet, and she had already learned something important about her new life. Being human in a galaxy full of supposedly superior species was going to be very interesting indeed. The Academy's combat training facility buzzed with nervous energy as first-year students gathered for their inaugural tactical assessment. The massive chamber could simulate any environment in known space, from the methane swamps of Titan VII to the crystalline caves of the Andromeda colonies. Today, however, it was configured as a standard urban warfare scenario, complete with destroyed buildings, debris-filled streets, and strategic choke points that would test every student's combat awareness. Maya stood with the other human students near the back of the group, trying to maintain the low profile she'd been carefully cultivating for the past 2 weeks. Since the incident with Valdris, word had spread quickly through the academy about the human girl who had humiliated an Altarian noble. The story had grown in the telling, with some versions claiming she'd broken his arm in 7 places, and others suggesting she was some kind of secret government assassin. The truth, Maya knew, was both simpler and more complicated than the rumors. She was exactly what she'd told Valdris she was, a survivor of humanity's bloodiest conflict, trained by necessity to fight enemies that most species couldn't imagine. But she was also trying very hard to be something else now. Instructor Vexhai, a veteran Thurian warrior with scars crisscrossing his bear-like features, stood at the front of the group. His deep voice rumbled through the chamber as he explained the day's exercise. "Combat assessment is not about determining who can kill most efficiently," he said, his small black eyes scanning the assembled students. "Modern galactic warfare requires strategic thinking, tactical awareness, and the ability to minimize casualties while achieving objectives." He gestured to the simulated cityscape behind him. "Today's scenario involves a hostage situation. 12 civilian holograms are being held by 15 enemy combatants in various locations throughout the urban environment. Your mission is to neutralize the threats while ensuring minimal harm to the hostages." Maya listened with half her attention while observing her fellow students. The Altarians stood in perfect formation. their natural grace and discipline evident even in casual conversation. The Zephyrians chittered excitedly among themselves, their crystalline bodies refracting the chamber's lights into rainbow patterns. Near the front, she spotted Kip Brightwhisker among a small group of Pixians, the young alien still shooting grateful glances in her direction whenever he thought she wasn't looking. Students will be divided into mixed-species teams, HFY continued. This will test your ability to coordinate different racial strengths and compensate for various weaknesses. A holographic display materialized, showing team assignments. Maya found her name grouped with 5 other students, 2 Altarians, 1 Zephyrian, 1 Corvin, and surprisingly, Kip Brightwhisker. As the teams gathered together, Maya approached her assigned group with careful neutrality. The 2 Altarians, Thane Starweaver and Lyra Dawnchaser, regarded her with barely concealed suspicion. Both were first years, but they carried themselves with the confidence of beings raised in a warrior culture. "So," Thane said, his musical voice carrying an edge of challenge, "we have the infamous human on our team. I suppose we should be grateful for the opportunity to see these legendary colonial war skills in action." Maya met his gaze steadily. "I'm just here to learn, like everyone else." Lyra's laugh was like silver bells, but there was no warmth in it. "Learn what?" "How to terrorize fellow students. How to use your primitive violent instincts to intimidate civilized beings." The Zephyrian, whose name was Crystal Song at Twilight, chimed in with a voice like wind through crystal formations. "Perhaps we should focus on the exercise rather than past grievances." The Corvin, Dextar, nodded agreement with 2 of his 4 arms. "The assessment begins in 10 minutes. We should discuss strategy." Kip stepped closer to Maya, his courage clearly bolstered by her presence. "Maya helped me when no one else would. I trust her judgment." Thane's expression darkened. "Of course you would, Pixian. Your species has always been drawn to predators for protection." Maya felt the familiar cold settling over her, but she forced it back. This was exactly the kind of situation she needed to handle differently. "Thane," she said quietly, "if you have a problem with me, we can discuss it after the exercise. But right now, we have a mission to complete and teammates to protect." Lyra snorted. "Protect? We're perfectly capable of protecting ourselves, Primitive. Perhaps you should worry about keeping up with beings who learned strategy from the cradle rather than the battlefield." Before Maya could respond, Instructor HFY's voice boomed across the chamber. "Teams will enter the simulation in 60 seconds. Remember, minimizing casualties includes protecting your teammates. Any student who suffers significant injury will result in mission failure for their entire team." The warning was standard, but Maya caught the way the instructor's eyes lingered on her group. Word of the tension between species had obviously reached the faculty. As they moved toward their designated entry point, Dextar attempted to establish some kind of team coordination. "My species excels at multitasking and technical operations. I can handle communications and surveillance while the rest of you engage in direct action." Crystal Song chimed her agreement. "Zephyrians can phase through certain materials and move silently. I would be most effective as a scout." Thane and Lyra exchanged glances. "Altarians will naturally take point positions," Thane said with casual arrogance. "Our combat training and strategic thinking make us best suited for leadership roles." "What about you, Maya?" Kip asked. "What should you do?" All eyes turned to Maya, and she could feel the weight of their expectations and prejudices. The Altarians expected her to be a mindless brute, good only for charging into danger. Crystal Song and Dextar seemed curious, but cautious. Kip alone looked at her with complete trust. "I'll do whatever the team needs," Maya said simply. Lyra's expression suggested she found this answer unsatisfying. "How delightfully evasive. Very well, Stay back and try not to compromise the mission with your barbaric methods." The simulation chamber activated around them, and suddenly they stood on a debris-strewn street surrounded by the ruins of a city. Smoke drifted between damaged buildings, and the distant sound of weapons fire echoed through the artificial environment. Dextar immediately activated his scanning equipment, his forearms working independently to process multiple data streams. "I'm reading 15 enemy combatants spread across 3 buildings, 12 hostage signatures, mostly concentrated in the central structure." Crystal Song's form began to shimmer as she prepared to phase into reconnaissance mode. "I'll scout the perimeter and identify entry points." Thane drew his practice weapon, a holographic construct that would deliver painful but non-lethal feedback when it struck a target. "Lyra and I will advance on the primary objective. The rest of you provide support." Maya watched her teammates spread out according to their hastily formed plan, noting the tactical flaws even as they began to implement it. They were thinking like individual specialists rather than a coordinated unit, each focused on showcasing their species' particular strengths rather than achieving the mission objectives. She followed behind the group, her trained eye automatically cataloging details that her teammates were missing. The enemy placement patterns suggested a sophisticated defensive strategy. The buildings had been modified to create interlocking fields of fire. Most importantly, the hostage distributions were clearly designed to force attackers into a series of simultaneous assaults that would scatter their forces. Crystal Song returned from her scouting run, her crystalline form solidifying near the team's position. 3 entry points identified, but all are heavily defended. The enemy has positioned themselves to force us into direct confrontation. Thane nodded as if this confirmed his expectations. "Then we'll demonstrate proper Altarian tactical doctrine. Lyra, you take the western approach. I'll assault from the east. The support elements can—" "Wait," Maya said quietly. All eyes turned to her, and she could see the irritation on the Altarians' faces at being interrupted. "The hostage pattern is wrong," Maya continued. "They're spread out specifically to prevent simultaneous rescue attempts. If we split up, we'll be fighting 3 separate engagements instead of 1 coordinated assault." Thane's expression was dismissive. "Your concern is noted, human. However, Altarian tactical doctrine has been proven effective across thousands of engagements. We don't require input from species who learned warfare by accident." Maya felt the familiar weight of command decisions settling on her shoulders. She had faced this same situation countless times during the colonial wars, watching officers make decisions based on doctrine rather than battlefield reality. The difference was that in those situations, people died when leaders made the wrong choice. Here, failure would only mean a poor grade and wounded pride. But watching her teammates prepare to walk into an obvious trap triggered instincts that ran deeper than conscious thought. "The enemy knows we'll want to split up," Maya said, her voice carrying the quiet authority of someone who had led soldiers through hell. "They're counting on it. Look at the positioning again." Dextar's scanning equipment chirped as he focused on the details Maya was pointing out. "She's right," he said slowly. "The defensive pattern assumes we'll divide our forces. The central building is actually the weakest point if attacked by a concentrated force." Crystal Song chimed thoughtfully. "A unified assault would also allow us to protect each other more effectively." But Thane was already moving, his weapon ready and his expression set in stubborn determination. "Enough debate. Altarian doctrine has served the galaxy for millennia. We're not changing tactics based on the opinion of a primitive warrior." Lyra was right behind him, equally convinced of her species' tactical superiority. "Come, Thane. Let's show these others how proper soldiers conduct an assault." Maya watched them advance toward their chosen entry points, splitting the team exactly as the enemy defenders had anticipated. Dextar looked uncertain. his scanning equipment showing the increasing danger, but his cultural conditioning making him reluctant to contradict the Altarians' leadership. The first shots came 30 seconds later. Thane's position erupted in holographic weapons fire as he found himself facing 3 defenders instead of the single enemy his reconnaissance had suggested. His return fire was precise and well-trained, but he was quickly pinned down behind insufficient cover. Lyra's assault fared even worse. The western approach had been prepared as a killing field, with carefully positioned defenders creating overlapping fields of fire that caught her completely exposed. Her tactical training was excellent, but it had never prepared her for the kind of trap that actual combat veterans would set for overconfident attackers. "They're in trouble," Dexter said, his voice tight with worry as his sensors tracked the simulated battle. Crystal Song was already moving toward Thane's position, her ability to phase through solid matter making her the fastest member of the team. "I can reach Thane, but Lyra is too far away." Kip looked at Maya with desperate hope. "Can you help them?" Maya stood for a moment at the crossroads between her old life and her new one. She had come to the academy to learn peace, to study diplomacy, to find ways to solve conflicts without violence. But her teammates were in danger, and all her carefully maintained civilian facade couldn't change the fact that she was the only one present who actually understood this kind of tactical situation. The decision, when it came, felt inevitable. "Dexter, I need you to patch into the building's communication systems," Maya said, her voice carrying the crisp authority of battlefield command. "Crystal Song, forget Thane for now. I need you to phase into the central building and identify the exact positions of the hostages." Both aliens responded immediately to the certainty in her voice. Their earlier uncertainty replaced by relief at having someone take decisive command. "Kip," Maya continued, "you're with me. We're going to collect Thane and Lyra, then hit the central building as a unified force." Kip's eyes widened. "But the Altarians said to provide support from here." Maya was already moving, her body shifting into the predatory grace that had kept her alive through 3 years of warfare. "The Altarians are about to be captured or killed because they're fighting the last war instead of this one. We're going to save them, complete the mission, and maybe teach them something about human tactical doctrine." She advanced toward Thane's position with movements that seemed to flow like water around obstacles. Her path took her through terrain that should have been impossible to traverse without being spotted. But Maya had learned to read battlefields the way others read books. Behind her, Kip followed as best he could, his small size actually becoming an advantage as he slipped through gaps that larger beings couldn't navigate. Maya reached Thane's position just as his ammunition ran low. The Altarian was pressed behind a chunk of rubble, holographic rounds chipping pieces from his cover with increasing frequency. "Thane," Maya called softly. The Altarian spun, his weapon trained on her before he recognized his teammate. "Maya, what are you doing here? I ordered you to provide support from the rear." "Your orders are about to get you captured," Maya replied calmly. "The defenders have you pinned in a crossfire. In about 30 seconds, they're going to flank you from the south." Thane's expression was incredulous. "That's impossible. My reconnaissance showed no enemy positions to the south." As if summoned by his words, weapons fire erupted from exactly where Maya had predicted. Thane threw himself flat as holographic rounds passed through the space where his head had been moments before. "How did you know?" he gasped. Maya was already moving, her return fire precise and economical. Each shot found its target with mechanical efficiency, suppressing the flanking force and buying them precious seconds. "Because I've been in this exact situation before," she said. "The enemy commander is good, but he's using textbook tactics. Kip, signal Crystal Song. Tell her we're moving to Lyra's position in 60 seconds. "But how are we supposed to reach her?" Thane demanded. "The entire street is covered by interlocking fire lanes." Maya smiled. and for the first time since arriving at the academy, it was the expression of a predator who had just spotted prey. "Leave that to me," she said. What happened next would be discussed in academy tactical classes for years to come. Maya Chen moved through the simulated battlefield like death-given form, her movements precise and economical in a way that spoke of hard-won experience. She didn't fight like someone who had learned combat as an academic exercise or a cultural tradition. She fought like someone who had done it for survival, day after day, against enemies that gave no quarter and expected none. The defensive positions that had seemed impregnable moments before were systematically dismantled by someone who understood exactly how such defenses were supposed to work and, more importantly, how they could be defeated. Maya used the terrain like a three-dimensional puzzle, finding angles of approach that the defenders had never considered because they had never faced an opponent who thought in terms of pure tactical necessity rather than doctrinal procedure. By the time she reached Lyra's position, the proud Altarian was barely conscious, her holographic armor flickering with simulated damage indicators. The Western approach had indeed been a killing field, just as Maya had predicted. "Can you move?" Maya asked, checking Lyra's injuries with practiced efficiency. Lyra's eyes focused on her with difficulty. You came back for me, but I called you primitive." "You're my teammate," Maya said simply. "That's all that matters." She helped Lyra to her feet, supporting the injured Altarian while scanning for threats. "Dextar, status report." The Corvin's voice crackled through their communication system. "I've identified the enemy command post and hacked into their tactical network. Crystal Song has located all 12 hostages in the central building. But Maya, there are 15 defenders in that building alone. The initial count was wrong." Maya absorbed this information without surprise. "They're using the hostages as bait, hoping we'll rush in without proper reconnaissance. Classic defensive strategy when you're outnumbered." Thane, who had been following her lead with increasing wonder, shook his head. 15 defenders, 6 attackers, 12 hostages to protect. The mathematics are impossible. Maya looked at him with something that might have been pity. "Thane, you're thinking like this is a fair fight. The enemy isn't interested in giving us sporting odds. They want to win, which means they'll use every dirty trick they can think of." She studied the central building through her weapon's scope, her mind automatically calculating angles, distances, and tactical possibilities. "But here's the thing about dirty tricks," she continued. "They only work if your opponent follows the rules you expect them to follow. The enemy has positioned themselves to fight Altarian tactical doctrine, or Zephyrian phase tactics, or Corvin technical superiority." Her smile was sharp and dangerous. "They're not prepared to fight humans." What Maya did next would become required viewing for every tactical instructor in the academy. She didn't charge into the building like a berserker, despite what her teammates expected. She didn't attempt to outfight 15 defenders in direct confrontation. Instead, she did something that none of the other species would have considered. She changed the rules of engagement entirely. Using Dextar's technical skills and Crystal Song's phasing ability, Maya turned the defenders' own trap against them. The carefully planned defensive positions became death traps when attacked by someone who understood that buildings had structural weaknesses, that enemy communications could be hacked and fed false information, and that hostages could be moved if you were creative about using the building's own systems against its occupants. In 23 minutes, Maya Chen and her team had neutralized all 15 defenders, rescued all 12 hostages, and completed the mission with 0 casualties. When the simulation ended, and they stood once again in the Academy's training chamber, every student in the facility was staring at them in stunned silence. Instructor Vexhai approached their team with an expression of professional interest. "Cadet Chen," he rumbled. "That was perhaps the most unorthodox tactical display I have witnessed in 30 years of instruction." Maya straightened to attention, unsure whether she was about to be praised or disciplined. "Sir, I followed mission parameters and prioritized teammate safety as instructed." The massive Thurian's scarred features split into what might have been a smile. "Indeed you did. You also demonstrated tactical thinking that I have never seen from a first-year student of any species." He turned to address the entire group of students, his voice carrying clearly through the chamber. "What you have just witnessed," Vex High announced, "is why humanity was accepted into the Galactic Federation despite being a relatively young spacefaring species. Their methods are unconventional, their strategies often defy established doctrine, but their effectiveness cannot be questioned." The instructor's gaze returned to Maya. "Cadet Chen, I believe there are some details about human military capability that have been significantly understated in our official records. Perhaps you would be willing to guest lecture on colonial war tactics for our advanced strategy classes." Maya felt the weight of hundreds of stares, the mixture of fear, respect, and curiosity from her fellow students. This was exactly what she had hoped to avoid when she came to the academy. But looking at her teammates, seeing the newfound respect in Thane's eyes and the gratitude in Lyra's expression, she realized that hiding from her past might not be the answer. "I'd be honored, sir," she said quietly. As the students began to disperse, chattering excitedly about what they had witnessed, Thane approached Maya with obvious humility. "I owe you an apology," he said formally. "I allowed my preconceptions about your species to cloud my judgment. You saved my life, and Lyra's, and you led us to victory when my own arrogance would have led to failure." Lyra nodded agreement, her earlier hostility replaced by genuine respect. "I called you primitive, but you fought with more sophistication than I have ever seen. How did you know what the enemy would do before they did it?" Maya considered her answer carefully. "Because I fought them before, not these exact enemies, but the strategies they used, the traps they set, the way they thought about combat. When you've seen enough patterns, you start to recognize them." Crystal Song chimed softly. "How many battles did you fight in your colonial wars, Maya?" The question hung in the air like a challenge. Maya could deflect it, change the subject, return to her careful civilian facade. But looking at her teammates, she realized they deserved better than evasion. 147 major engagements," she said quietly. "Countless smaller actions. 3 years of continuous combat against an enemy that wanted to turn my entire species into biological soup." The silence that followed was profound. Kip finally spoke, his voice filled with awe. "You were a child." Maya's smile was sad and old beyond her years. "We all were, by the end. War has a way of making adults out of children very quickly." As her teammates absorbed this revelation, Maya realized that her carefully planned new life at the academy was going to be more complicated than she had hoped. But perhaps that wasn't entirely a bad thing. After all, the galaxy was full of conflicts waiting to happen, and maybe it needed people who understood that sometimes the difference between peace and war was simply having the right person in the right place when the shooting started. The Academy's emergency sirens wailed through the corridors at 0347 hours, jerking Maya from the light sleep that had become her norm since arriving at the institution. Around her, dorm mates stumbled from their beds in confusion, but Maya was already dressed and moving toward the emergency station before most of them had even opened their eyes. 3 months had passed since the tactical assessment that had changed everything. Maya's reputation as both a tactical genius and a dangerous human had spread throughout the academy, bringing with it opportunities she had never expected and complications she was still learning to navigate. The emergency alert display showed a priority 1 distress signal from the Outer System Patrol Station. Pirates, or raiders most likely, taking advantage of the Academy's isolated location to strike at what they assumed would be a soft target filled with privileged students. Maya reached the emergency assembly point at the same time as Instructor HFY, who was moving with the purposeful urgency of a professional soldier responding to a real crisis. "Cadet Chen," the massive Thurian rumbled, "I need your assessment of this tactical situation." The display showed the Academy's defensive status. Minimal military assets, mostly civilian faculty, and over 3,000 students from across the galaxy. The attacking force consisted of at least 12 ships of unknown configuration, moving in a coordinated assault pattern that suggested experienced military leadership rather than simple pirates. Maya studied the tactical display with the same focused intensity she had once applied to Cathara attack patterns. The enemy formation was sophisticated, designed to overwhelm the Academy's limited defenses through coordinated strikes against critical systems. "This isn't a raid," Maya said quietly. "It's a kidnapping operation. They want to capture students from influential families, probably for ransom or political leverage." HFY's scarred features darkened. "My assessment as well. The Academy's defensive systems are designed to repel pirates and raiders, not a coordinated military assault." He turned to Maya with an expression that mixed desperation with hope. "You have combat experience against organized forces. What are our options?" Maya felt the familiar weight of command settling on her shoulders, but this time it carried a different significance. These weren't her fellow soldiers, trained and experienced and willing to follow orders into hell. These were students, civilians, children of some of the galaxy's most powerful families who had never imagined they might face real danger. "We can't fight them ship to ship," Maya said, thinking aloud. "But we don't have to. The Academy's station is enormous, with hundreds of defensive positions and choke points. If we can get the students organized and positioned correctly—" "You want to turn 3,000 civilians into soldiers?" HFY asked. Maya's smile was grim. "I want to turn 3,000 students into something the enemy isn't prepared to fight." The next hour would become legend in Galactic Academy history. Maya Chen, the quiet human girl who had tried so hard to blend into the background, took command of the Academy's defense with the natural authority of someone who had learned leadership in the crucible of actual warfare. But she didn't approach the situation like a military commander, because she understood that her resources weren't military assets. They were something potentially much more dangerous. "Attention all students," Maya's voice echoed through the Academy's communication system. "This is Maya Chen, speaking under emergency protocol authorization from Instructor HFY. We are under attack by hostile forces attempting to capture Academy personnel for unknown purposes." Across the station, students from dozens of species stopped what they were doing to listen to the human girl who had become famous for her tactical brilliance. "I know most of you came here to study, not to fight," Maya continued. "But right now, fighting is what will keep you and your fellow students safe. The enemy expects to find frightened civilians hiding in dormitories. Instead, we're going to give them something they've never encountered before, a coordinated defense by the smartest young beings in the galaxy." In the Academy's main tactical center, faculty members watched in amazement as students began responding to Maya's call with enthusiasm rather than panic. Thane and Lyra were already organizing their fellow Altarians into disciplined units. Crystal Song was coordinating with other Zephyrians to establish reconnaissance networks. Kip Brightwhisker had somehow convinced a group of Pixians to volunteer for dangerous scouting missions. "Each species brings unique advantages," Maya's voice continued over the comm system. "Altarians, your natural grace and tactical training make you ideal for holding defensive positions. Zephyrians, your phasing ability gives us intelligence-gathering capabilities the enemy can't counter. Corvin multitasking skills are perfect for coordinating multiple defensive systems simultaneously." She paused, and when she continued, her voice carried the absolute confidence of someone who had done this before. "Thurians, your size and strength make you ideal for mobile defense and rapid response. Pixians, your small size and agility give you access to areas larger beings can't reach. Humans. She almost smiled. Humans will do what we always do. We'll improvise, adapt, and find ways to win that nobody expects. The enemy assault began 47 minutes later. The raiders approached the academy with the confidence of experienced predators, attacking what they assumed was easy prey. Their intelligence had told them to expect minimal resistance from a facility dedicated to education rather than warfare. They were completely unprepared for what they encountered instead. The academy students had transformed the station into a defensive nightmare that drew on the unique capabilities of dozens of different species working in perfect coordination. Altarian tactical precision combined with Zephyrian reconnaissance to create defensive positions that seemed to anticipate the enemy's every move. Corvan technical expertise turned the Academy's own systems into weapons, while Thurian's strength and determination held impossible positions against overwhelming odds. But it was the humans who provided the tactical creativity that bound everything together. Maya had positioned herself in the Academy's central command center, coordinating the defense through a communication network that would have been impossible without Corvan multitasking abilities. But her real contribution was the way she thought about the battle itself. Where traditional military doctrine saw problems, Maya saw opportunities. Where other commanders would have tried to match the enemy's strength, she looked for ways to use their aggression against them. Most importantly, she understood that the Academy's greatest weapon wasn't any military hardware, but the fact that it contained some of the most intelligent young beings in the galaxy. The first wave of raiders penetrated the Academy's outer hull expecting to find panicked civilians. Instead, they encountered carefully coordinated defensive positions that channeled them into killing zones where Altarian precision and Thurian strength could be applied with devastating effectiveness. The second wave attempted to outflank the defenders by using their superior mobility. But Maya had anticipated this, positioning Zephyrian scouts to provide early warning while Pixian infiltrators sabotaged the raiders' equipment from within areas too small for larger beings to access. The third wave tried to overwhelm the defenders through sheer numbers and firepower. This played directly into Maya's hands, because she had learned during the colonial wars that sometimes the best defense was a calculated offense that struck where the enemy least expected it. All units. "This is command!" Maya's voice rang through the Academy's corridors as the battle reached its crescendo. "Implement Dragon Protocol!" Dragon Protocol was Maya's own tactical innovation, named after the ancient Earth legend of creatures that appeared to be one thing, while actually being something far more dangerous. The Academy students had spent weeks drilling the maneuver in secret, but this would be its first real-world application. To the raiders, it appeared that the Academy's defenders were finally breaking under pressure, falling back from key positions in apparent panic. The enemy commanders saw their opportunity and committed their reserves to what looked like a decisive assault. They realized their mistake only when it was too late to retreat. The Academy students hadn't been retreating. They had been repositioning into a carefully planned formation that turned the station's own layout into a massive trap. The raiders found themselves surrounded, outnumbered, and facing opponents who knew every corridor, access tunnel, and emergency system in the facility. The battle that followed lasted less than 20 minutes, but it would be studied in military academies across the galaxy for decades to come. Maya had turned 3,000 students into a fighting force that combined the tactical advantages of dozens of different species into something greater than the sum of its parts. When the last raider surrendered, the Academy's corridors were filled with the sound of cheering students who had just learned that they were capable of far more than they had ever imagined. Maya stood in the command center, looking at tactical displays that showed complete victory achieved with minimal casualties. Around her, Faculty members stared at readouts that documented the most sophisticated multi-species tactical coordination in recorded galactic history. "Cadet Chen," Instructor Vex-High said quietly, "I believe we need to have a serious discussion about your future academic track." Before Maya could respond, the command center's doors burst open to admit a figure that made everyone in the room snap to attention. Admiral Kessetai, the Altarian commander of the Galactic Federation's 4th Fleet, strode into the room with the bearing of someone accustomed to having entire star systems obey his orders. "Where," the Admiral demanded, "is the tactical genius who just humiliated one of the most successful raider fleets in this sector?" All eyes turned to Maya, who suddenly felt very young and very human under the Admiral's intense scrutiny. "You're the human child who coordinated this defense?" Kessetai asked, his musical voice carrying undertones of disbelief. Maya straightened to attention. "Sir, I coordinated the student response under emergency protocols. The actual defense was accomplished by every student and faculty member working together." The Admiral studied her for a long moment, his alien features unreadable. "I've been fighting raiders and pirates for 43 years, child. I've never seen a more sophisticated defensive coordination, and I've certainly never seen 3,000 civilians turned into an effective fighting force in under 2 hours. He gestured to an aide who activated a holographic display showing the battle from the raiders' perspective. "Do you know what this looked like from the enemy's viewpoint? It looked like they were fighting ghosts. Every time they thought they understood your defensive pattern, it changed. Every time they found what appeared to be a weakness, it turned out to be a trap." Maya watched the replay with professional interest, noting areas where the defense could have been improved and tactical decisions that had worked better than expected. "With respect, sir," she said carefully, "the enemy was using standard assault doctrine against an unconventional defensive setup. Their tactics were predictable once you understood their command structure and operational preferences." Admiral Kessetai's expression shifted from disbelief to something approaching awe. "Predictable," he repeated slowly. "You found a coordinated military assault predictable." "Sir, I fought in the Terran colonial wars for 3 years. After facing the Kythera hive mind, most conventional military operations seem relatively straightforward." The silence that followed this statement was profound. Every being in the command center was staring at Maya with new understanding of exactly what she represented. "The colonial wars," Admiral Kessetai said slowly. "I read the Federation's intelligence reports on that conflict. According to our analysis, humans achieved tactical victories that should have been impossible given the disparity in technology and numbers." Maya's expression remained carefully neutral. "We learned to be creative, sir. When you're fighting for the survival of your entire species, conventional tactics become less important than effectiveness." The Admiral studied her for another long moment, then turned to address the room in general. "Ladies and gentlemen," he announced, "I believe we are witnessing the emergence of a new form of military thinking. What happened here today wasn't just a successful defense. It was a demonstration of tactical possibilities that most of us had never considered." He turned back to Maya. "Cadet Chen, I am hereby offering you immediate admission to the Federation's Advanced Strategic Command Program. Your talents are wasted on undergraduate studies." Maya felt the weight of opportunity and expectation settling on her shoulders like a familiar coat. This was exactly what she had been trying to avoid when she came to the academy, the militarization of her future that would trap her forever in the role of a weapon rather than a person. But looking around the command center, seeing the faces of faculty and students who had just learned that they were capable of defending themselves against any threat, Maya realized that her choice wasn't about avoiding her past anymore. It was about choosing how to use her experiences to shape the future. "Sir," she said carefully, "I appreciate the honor of your offer, but I came to the academy to study peace, not war." I believe the galaxy needs people who understand how to prevent conflicts as much as it needs people who know how to win them. Admiral Kessetai's expression showed surprise, then something that might have been respect. An interesting perspective from someone who just demonstrated such exceptional military capability. Maya smiled, and for the first time since arriving at the academy, it was completely genuine. Sir, the best way to ensure peace is to make potential aggressors understand that attacking peaceful people is a very bad idea. Today, word will spread through every pirate fleet and raider organization in this sector that the Galactic Academy is defended by students who can turn their own educational facility into a military fortress. She gestured to the tactical displays still showing the aftermath of the battle. We didn't just win a fight today, sir. We sent a message that students from dozens of species can work together to defend themselves and each other. That message will do more to promote peace than any number of military victories. The Admiral nodded slowly. I begin to understand why humanity was accepted into the Federation so quickly, despite being such a young spacefaring civilization. Your species brings a perspective that none of us had considered. He paused, then smiled. Very well, Cadet Chen. Continue your studies in peace and diplomacy. But I want you to know that if you ever change your mind, the Federation would be honored to have you serve in a command capacity. As the Admiral and his staff departed, Maya found herself surrounded by fellow students and faculty members, all eager to express their gratitude and amazement at what had been accomplished. Thane and Lyra approached with expressions of profound respect. Maya, Thane said formally, I owe you an apology that goes far beyond our earlier misunderstandings. You didn't just save our lives today, you showed us what we're capable of when we work together instead of competing against each other. Lyra nodded agreement. I called you primitive when we first met. Now I understand that human military thinking isn't primitive at all. It's simply different from anything the rest of us had imagined. Crystal Song chimed her own appreciation. Today, Zephyrians worked alongside Altarians, Coven alongside Thurians, all coordinated by human tactical thinking. This is what the Federation is supposed to be. But I had never seen it actually work before. Kip Brightwhisker pushed through the crowd to reach Maya's side. You saved me from bullies on my first day, he said, his large eyes bright with hero worship. Today, you saved all of us from something much worse. How do any of us repay a debt like that? Maya looked around at the faces surrounding her, seeing representatives of dozens of species who had started the day as separate groups defined by their differences and ended it as a unified force that had proven capable of defending themselves against any threat. You don't owe me anything, she said quietly. Today proved that we're all capable of incredible things when we work together. The Academy isn't just a place where different species study side by side. It's a place where we learn to be something greater than any of us could be alone. She smiled at the assembled students and faculty. Besides, I think word is going to spread pretty quickly through the galaxy about what happened here. Every potential aggressor from here to the Outer Rim is going to think twice before attacking facilities protected by Academy graduates. We just made the galaxy a safer place for everyone. As the crowd began to disperse, students returning to dormitories and faculty members beginning the process of documenting the day's events for official reports, Maya found herself standing alone in the command center with Instructor HFY. You know, the massive Thurian said thoughtfully, when you first arrived at this academy, I read your file and wondered what a colonial war veteran would bring to our educational environment. I thought perhaps you would struggle to adapt to civilian life. Maya nodded. I was worried about the same thing. Instead, HFY continued, you've shown us that military experience and peaceful intentions aren't contradictory. Today, you used your knowledge of warfare to protect peace, your understanding of violence to prevent greater violence. The instructor's scarred features arranged themselves into what might have been a smile. I believe you found your calling, Cadet Chen. Not as a warrior, not as a diplomat, but as something new. A guardian of peace who understands that sometimes the best way to prevent war is to demonstrate that attacking peaceful people will be met with resistance they cannot overcome. Maya looked out through the command center's viewports at the stars beyond, thinking about the message that would soon spread through the galaxy. The story of the day when Academy students had proven that education and preparation could triumph over aggression and greed. I hope you're right, sir, she said quietly, because I think the galaxy is going to need more people who understand that peace isn't the absence of conflict. It's the presence of justice, defended by those who have the strength and wisdom to protect it. As she left the command center and made her way back to her dormitory, Maya realized that her carefully planned new life had once again taken an unexpected turn. But this time, she wasn't running from her past or trying to hide what she had been. She was building something new, something that combined everything she had learned about warfare with everything she hoped to learn about peace. The galaxy was vast and full of potential conflicts, but it was also full of young beings like her fellow students who were capable of incredible things when given the chance to work together. Maya Chen, veteran of humanity's bloodiest war, had found her true calling at last, not as a weapon to be aimed at humanity's enemies, but as a teacher who could show others that strength and wisdom together were more powerful than either could ever be alone. The Academy had laughed at the quiet human girl when she first arrived. Now they would remember her as the person who had shown them all what they were truly capable of becoming. And across the galaxy, in pirate strongholds and raider bases, in the planning rooms of would-be aggressors, and the council chambers of those who thought peaceful students were easy targets, a new understanding was beginning to spread. Attacking the innocent was no longer safe, because somewhere in the galaxy there were guardians who understood both war and peace, who could turn schools into fortresses and students into defenders, who would ensure that those who chose violence would face consequences they were not prepared to handle. Humanity had joined the galactic community not just as another species seeking its place among the stars, but as something new and unexpected. A people who had learned to fight so well that they could afford to choose peace, secure in the knowledge that their choice was backed by the strength to defend it. The Academy's new student had indeed brought her warrior past into their peaceful halls. But instead of disrupting that peace, she had made it stronger, more real, and more lasting than it had ever been before. The galaxy, Maya realized, was about to become a much more interesting place.